Hello everyone, my name is Andrej Podhradsky and I have been working for Red Hat for more than 5 years and I'm responsible for testing SWT based applications, namely Dev Studio, JBoss Dev Studio, maybe you know it. It's based on Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers, and it brings lots of and various plugins and modelers, editors. And I'm in a QE team which is developing functional tests for this product. First of all, I would like to mention that there was a nice talk in the morning about the best practices, and the guy was right that you should use JUnit tests as much as possible, because functional testing takes a lot of time. But there are situations and use cases which can't be covered by simple JUnit tests. I will start by example. So here we can see a very simple dialog from Eclipse IDE. You can see there is a wizard, text fields, buttons, checkbox, and so on. And here I will show you how it looks when we want to use RedDeer for testing such dialog. First of all, we need to use runtime with annotation, because RedDeer provides some new features to the JUnit, and we must extend the classical JUnit suite. And here are commands we can use for testing the previous dialog. You can see new default shell and title. Then new label text, again title, set text, and so on. I think this is quite obvious. The syntax is pretty easy. And the last command is clicking on the finish button. Well, do you think this is okay? Do you think that the dialog wizard will be closed immediately after clicking on the button finish? Not always. There are some situations when the dialog still be opened and you can't proceed in your test. That's why we must use some wait conditions. In this case, it is again very obvious. We have to wait while the shell and dialog is available. That's all. So this is just first look at the RedDeer test and what it brings. Here is another example. This is a graffiti editor, namely Fuse tooling, and this is a camel root. This is a bit complicated. You have on the right side palette, and on the left side there is modeler, and you have to manipulate with the components. This is just the piece of code, how we can handle the modeler and the components. Again, we try to provide very obvious syntax, which is very meaningful. You can see that there are methods add tool from palette, and that's just for an example. You may notice that the syntax is very similar to the other functional testing framework, which is called SWTBot. Hands up, who knows the SWTBot? Cool, almost all of you. That's great. So probably you may ask why there is just another framework with very similar features and functionality. Well, this is the basic difference. This is only syntax difference, which is very, very similar. And to be honest, the RedDeer at the beginning was built on top of the SWTBot. The original name was SWTBot X, like an extension. So this wasn't meant at the beginning to substitute this existing framework. And some of guys from my team also contributed to SWTBot. But as time went on, the RedDeer became a standalone framework so that we could remove all SWTBot dependencies, and we can become completely standalone. So here are features which are in common with SWTBot. It is programmatic approach you have seen. You can use this framework only on SWTBot based applications. You can't use it for Swing or AWT or for HTML, just like SWTBot. We support Windows, Mac, Linux. We use Tycho for building and executing tests. The test can be executed from command line or from the IDE. And we can also specify that the tests can be executed against an existing instance. I mean, you can test the final product. There is nothing built on the runtime. This is just the product users will get. Of course, if there is an error or some exception is thrown, a screenshot is captured, and there is also GEF support. Oops. And RedDeer also brings some basic support for graffiti. And here are differences. We try to use direct API so that we can save the time during the tests. We use some enhanced waiting conditions. We also provide high-level API. This is we provide some support for wizards and views from Java EE. I mean Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers, because our main product Dev Studio is built on this instance. And the main difference are requirements. We will talk about them later. And there is some disadvantage. RedDeer doesn't support E4 now, but we plan to implement it in a near future. So direct API, it is very easy. Preferences, if you have IDE, you need to set lots of preferences so that you can follow some use case without any unexpected behavior, and it is very time consuming to do it via click help, preferences, and apply, and so on. There is some that we can use the direct API. We also create and delete projects via the direct API. We get some locations of the files directly. There are some other features, such as something is related to workspace and workbench and so on. But there is not many features at this moment which use direct API, but our plan is to use it as much as possible. Waiting conditions. So I will start with the simplest one. you will wait for a specified time of seconds. Here we use enumeration. Short means 1 second. There are default, which means 10 seconds. And we use this enumeration because some slaves are pretty fast and some slaves are pretty slow. So on each slave we can specify the system property time period factor. And the waiting time is increased and decreased according to this property. Then we have wait until and wait while conditions. I see there is I did a mistake. Wait until. Okay, never mind. And RedDeer provides lots of existing conditions, such as job is running. This is my favorite one because I use it all the time. And shell is available, of course. This is also in SWTBot. But not all conditions must be met always. There are some situations, for example, if you know progress information dialog. For example, if you create a Maven project, some dependencies must be downloaded, and sometimes this is fast and this dialog doesn't appear. And sometimes when the connection is slow, this dialog appears and you have to wait until everything is downloaded. So that's why we can use Boolean to specify whether an exception should be thrown or not. Also, the condition returns a result because we want to save time, and once we have some condition and the condition is completed, then we don't need to again check what was the result, what was the opened dialog, and so on. We just call getResult. We can also group the conditions. There are situations where you have to define and combine various conditions. So you can just use group wait. Well, high-level API, for example, wizards. As I mentioned before, we try to provide wizards and views and so on out of the box for the Java IDE for Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers. For example, there is a Java project wizard in SWTBot or also in RedDeer. You could do the step-by-step approach, like menu, click new project, then wait until the dialog is opened, and then set project name, click finish, and wait whether the dialog is gone, and so on. You can use this straightforward approach. Also, views are quite easy. You don't need to find in the problems view whether it is implemented via, let's say, SWTTable or tree. I'm not sure what's the current implementation, but just to call get all errors is very meaningful. And we try to provide such API for all wizards in Eclipse IDE for Java EE developers. Maybe you can ask we can ask the why or from where comes the names of the wizards. Probably because it is not easy. There are so many wizards, and to know which wizard I should use in my test. Have you ever seen something like this? If you open a wizard or dialog, you can just press key combination, the shortcut. I think it is Alt-Shift-F1, sorry. And such dialog will pop up. And you can see that the wizard is called Java Project Wizard, and the page class is named New Java Project Wizard Page 1, which is exactly what we have on this slide. So this is something we would like to follow for every wizards and views, so that it is easy to find which class we have to use. Requirements. This is the core feature of RedDeer, because some tests usually need some other specification. For example, they need they need servers or databases and so on. Another problem is that if you have the test on public repository, like we have, and the databases and servers are in some internal places and contain some private information, for example, passwords and so on, this can't be located on public repository. That's why we started using requirements. You can define your server in an external file. At the moment, we support YAML or JSON files. Here is an example. The first line is our class, and then you can just specify value, key and value lines. These values are then mapped to the class you have specified on the first class, on the first line. In this case, we specify information for our Apache Tomcat server, and this is fulfilled. This requirement is fulfilled before the before class annotation. And what does it mean, the fulfillment, that this requirement is fulfilled? It means that the server is added via servers view and the wizards, and probably it is also started. Here is the annotation, how you can just specify that this test really needs the server, and in the annotation you can also specify the state, which is running or present or stopped. If there are more tests in your test suite with such annotation, only once the server will be added. If you need some properties from your requirement, from the file you have specified, you can just inject the requirement, and by get methods you can get your properties. You can also specify which servers you support and which versions. This can be done by another annotation, requirement restriction, and there are some out-of-the-box matchers, such as version matcher, greater or equal to 7.0. I forgot to mention that we need these restrictions from the one reason. In this file, you can specify more servers or databases, whatever, of the same type, but with different version. And the test, if you specify 3 servers, the test will be executed 3 times with the different versions. And you can restrict the set of servers which should be used for your test execution by this requirement restriction. Yeah, and here are some projects which already use RedDeer. First of all, I would like to mention the fuse tooling. A month ago, we have moved all our tests to the fuse tooling repository. So there are JUnit tests, some simple integration tests, and these functional tests. At the moment, we do not execute functional tests for every pull request because it is very time consuming. But we would like to select some of the tests so that they will be handled in, let's say, half an hour, because some functional tests are really time consuming. One of our tests takes about 5 hours. But this is really special case. There are also some repositories for JBoss tools. These repositories contain only the functional tests, and these tests are waiting for migration to its own product and project. So, any questions? Yeah. Uh, well, if you run it from IDE and new Eclipse instance is executed, so and the tests are running in the new instance. But if you run it from command line, there is the tests are executed by Tycho plugin, and the Tycho will build some running instance which is not exactly the one like the real Eclipse IDE or Dev Studio. But is that your answer for your question, or? Well, everything is deployed automatically, the test. So there's no need to specify something else. If you want to execute the test against an existing instance, then you just specify the path. The tests are built and installed to the instance, just like SWTBot does. Yeah. Okay. Well, the question is whether if we want to click on a button, whether we need the label. No, we can also use index, which is not always good, but well, okay, I will. I will try to answer on the example. So it doesn't matter if it is a button or tree or table or whatever. Do you know Humcrest matchers? Yeah, this is, yeah. There is a Java library named Humcrest, and this library provides matchers, which is a simple class with one method, with one important method called matches, and this method returns a Boolean value. So if we are if we are looking for a button or table, whatever, this matcher just say we are, first of all, sorry, I will start how the widgets are finding. We try to find some dialog. The shell, in this case, it is shell, or any active dialog, and then we try to go through the its tree, because dialog shell has a method getChildren, which returns composite, and this composite also have method getChildren, and this is a tree that on the top is shell, then there is some group or composite, and on each node of this tree we are calling the matcher, and so it means that we are trying to verify whether shell is that button with some other properties. No, then continue, is that button or tree or something like that with another properties. No, then continue. And once we find the correct one, we just return it, and we can work with them. Yeah, it's very similar. You mean whether we can get the label of an existing SWT button, not the RedDeer button, but yeah. Yeah, you can. This is the second part I would like to mention here. We can, in this case, we use shell, which means that we are trying to find the widget in this shell, but we can omit this this parameter. If we omit the parameter, we just try to find the active view, dialog, workbench, whatever, and then we try to find the widget. And here, instead of shell, you can use group, section, any composite you will find, you have found before. You mean like text field and label are not, sometimes they are first defined the text field and then the label, but in the result it looks good. You mean that? Yeah. In fact, this label text has very complicated logic for finding for matching the labels with the button. And there are some heuristics, and as you said, this is not always easy to find and to match. And we try to do some heuristic to get rid of this problem. And so far it works. There were lots of contributions by many people to enhance this logic. Yeah? Yeah, yeah. The question is whether we can find the widget according to the ID. But first of all, the widget must provide such ID. And this is not a common use case. But of course, if you define your own match, you have to define your own matcher. RedDeer doesn't support out of the box finding widgets by ID. No. Because as I said, this framework was built especially for our use cases, and we usually met troubles with the ID because our developers do not provide ID for SWT widgets. And not only developers from Red Hat, because we use some other projects which are located at Eclipse. And this is something which sounds to be good, and I'm pretty sure this will help us with the stable testing, but we didn't use it, so we didn't provide such support for it. Any other questions? So thank you very much for your attention, and please evaluate this session